The Fairy Lover. Many of Scotland's most beautiful places are in the west. Here you will find the astonishingly beautiful islands of the Inner Hebrides: Coll, Rum, Tiree, Iona and Skye, the Isle of Mists. Even further out, right at the edge of the world, lie the Outer Hebrides, the Isles of Bride, where the goddess herself walks on the white sands. Lewis is the northernmost island, and Lewis has its own Wild West, called Uig. Uig is a landscape that draws some and repels others. Her rocky, marshy, treeless glens are strewn with boulders and lochans, caves and blowholes, standing stones and storm beaches. It's a place of bleak and savage beauty, and it is in Uig that our story takes place. In the village of Carrishadder, there once lived a young man. He shared with his parents their black house, tending their cattle, goats and the few crops the ground would give them. He didn't mind the work, but what he liked best was to be away from his home and the warm hearth. Whenever he had time to himself, he would head out to the rocky hills and rainy beaches. There he could free his mind from the fetters of work, scattering his thoughts upon the wind. One day he was out walking among the mountains when a storm blew in, fast and fierce. He made for a place he knew nearby, where heaps of boulders offered shelter. Reaching the rocks, he crawled into the space beneath them. It was already occupied. A woman sat there. She was about his age, or so she seemed, a dark-haired beauty with green eyes that pulled him in like whirlpools. Her long, slender fingers caressed a harp, drawing quiet, tender music from it. "I don't know you," he said. "You know me now," she said. "Come in out of the rain." He sat down and stared at her. "Where do you bide?" he asked. "Where do you bide?" she asked him. "Carrishadder?" "Aye," he said. "That's fine music you're playing." "The music's playing me," she said. He didn't know what to make of that, but he stayed and listened as the thunder rumbled and the rain fell. Upon the strings her fingers danced, her dark eyes shone, and the young man dreamed he was an eagle flying proud among an ocean of stars. Eventually she said it was time to be leaving. He asked if he could see her again. She said yes, and he asked again where she stayed. "Let's meet at Mangursta," she said. She pressed into his hand a stone knife, sharp as death, "for you to remember me by." They parted ways. The young man floated home, the knife in his pocket. He hardly slept until the next time he saw her. Thus their courting began. They would meet and walk together on far-flung beaches or lonely glens, and stop in a cave or at a lochside to sing songs, swap tales or make love on the cold rocks. She was wild in a way he had never known. She loved to run with the red deer, dive into the raging ocean, and dance naked in the storms. Love consumed him like a fire set to dry thatch. It took a while, for love can silence many questions, but he began to wonder why she never introduced him to her people, and why he had kept her a secret from his own. Why she knew so many tales he'd never heard, and why her music had him soaring among the stars. There was a simple answer to all the riddles, yet he didn't want to face it. They met one day in a high rainy glen where the red deer roamed. He asked her for the truth. "Aye," she said, "I'm a fairy." Now that she'd said it, he could no longer lie to himself. The truth weighed heavily on him as he walked home through the rain. He was deeply in love with his fairy lover, but she was not alone in stirring his heartstrings. He loved the black house where he had grown up, with its sweet smell of peat smoke and the acrid smells of men and beasts. He loved to run with his lover through the hills in a storm, singing with the shrieking winds, but he also loved the hearth, the click-clack of his mother's needles, the flame of his father's pipe. His family had always worked that croft. Its soil was their blood. His fairy lover could share the wild places with him, but he couldn't bring her home to the black house. She could never be his wife. He knew the tale. Such affairs always fell foul, and he wasn't so daft as to think his would be different. The next time they met, he told her it was over. He turned and walked away from her. The following days passed as they must. He lay awake at night and sleepwalked through the day. Crows of grief tore at his carrion heart. He kept a weather eye open, but never saw her. One day he took his fishing boat out to the little islands north of Reef Beach. Coming into shore, he saw her standing on the sand. Something in her eyes turned his blood cold. He reached for the oars to turn the boat about. She held up her hand. It clutched a ball of yarn. She threw it at him, keeping hold of one end. Instinctively, his hand flew up and caught the yarn. He couldn't let go of it. She pulled on the yarn, pulling him and his vessel into shore. Closer and closer he came. Terror grew in him, for her eyes were as cold as the kayak's breath. Closer he came. As his hull scraped the sand, he remembered what was in his pocket, the stone knife, sharp as death. He took it out and cut the yarn. She screamed as if he had cut her flesh, while he grabbed his oars and rowed furiously away. After that, the young man didn't leave Carishander unless he had to. He no longer missed his fairy lover. His heart slowly healed. One day, a friend of his mother happened to drop by the house. She happened to have her daughter with her, who happened to be about his age. Their mothers made an excuse to leave them alone to talk, and after that they came by again and again. The girl didn't play the harp. She had no memory for stories and didn't like to be out in the rain, but she was a hard worker, funny and kind, quick to laugh and quick to forgive. His heart warmed slowly to her, but once warmed, it stayed that way. They married. She moved into the black house, and soon her belly swelled. Her husband put his hand on her belly and imagined roots growing from his feet through the floor and deep into the earth. The time came for the baby to be born. The midwife arrived at the house, along with the women who would help her. The young woman, who would soon be a mother, began to shudder and scream. Her husband panicked. The midwife told him birth was never easy. He could either calm down or go outside. He stayed put and kept quiet. Afternoon became evening. Evening became night. Still his wife screamed. The look on the midwife's face was different now. "What's wrong?" he shouted. "Why aren't you helping her?" The midwife ordered him out into the night. It was June, close to midsummer. A clear June night on Lewis is a perpetual dusk. He was able to see clearer as he walked out of the village, away from Carishander and up into the hills. He had to walk. On he went, onwards and upwards through the myriad glens. He walked and walked, stopped to catch his breath, and saw her. His fairy lover was sitting on a rock playing her harp, watching him. "Sit down," she said. He sat down beside her. "You look troubled," she said. "I am." "Why is that?" she asked. He hesitated. It's one of the goats. She's giving birth and it's not going well. We're worried we might lose the kid and her." The fairy slender fingers plucked at the harp strings. "I don't think it's a goat that's having trouble giving birth," she said. "They're in a field full of pearlwort. I think it's your wife." "No," he said. No, I don't have it." "You don't need to worry," she said with a laugh. "I was sweet on you once, but I'm not sweet on you now." "Aye," he said, "it's my wife." "Then for the sake of what we once shared, let me give you this." She reached into her pocket and took out a length of black rope. "Take this home. Tie it around your wife's waist, and your wife and bairn will be fine." He took it from her and thanked her. She shushed him and said, "Go, quick." He raced like a stag down the hillside. Below him he soon spied the village. He ran faster and was almost home when he halted. Words whispered in his mind, too faint to hear. A dreadful suspicion took hold of him. He looked at the length of rope in his hands. A boulder stood nearby. He went over to it, tied the rope about it, and stood back. The knot on the rope tightened and split the boulder in two. His wife and child would die. His heart shattered, yet as he fell to his knees, words whispered in his mind again. This time he heard them. "I don't think it's a goat that's having trouble giving birth. They're in a field full of pearlwort." Finally he understood. He dashed to the goat's field, vaulted the fence, and grabbed a clump of pearlwort. He ran home, crashed through the door, and slipped the pearlwort under his wife's back. Very soon after that, his baby was born. It was a boy. The young lad grew up healthy and strong, and his parents loved him fiercely. As he grew older, the boy often wondered why his parents never went walking on the hills and beaches. Sometimes, when he was alone in the wild places, he heard faint music and felt hidden eyes upon him. The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers and patrons. See you next week. Bye bye.